caregiving issues have become much more about cost of living and the pocketbook and being able to afford to be a caregiver.
1 in 4 Canadians is a caregiver. For most, it isn't a choice made out of obligation, it's made out of love.
In many workplaces across the economy, if I need to take an afternoon out of work to take my grandmother to go to see her gerontologist, for example, you're likely taking a vacation day, a half vacation day.
For James Janeiro, that means helping care for his 92-year-old grandmother. But behind every act of love is a reality few people talk about. Caregiving is becoming more expensive than ever. The Canadian Centre for Caregiving Excellence surveyed over 2,200 caregivers in Canada last year. Nearly half of those surveyed say they're struggling financially. In this story, we talk about some of the solutions the centre says would go a long way in supporting caregivers.
If you're a caregiver, odds are you're working less. If you're not working less, your expenses are higher. Therefore, we're going to give you some cash every month to help you with those expenses, with the view towards providing enough care that your loved one is able to stay in the community rather than have to be moved to more expensive, more institutionalized care models. My name is James Janeiro, and I'm the Director of Policy and Government Relations at the Canadian Centre for Caregiving Excellence.
Hey, first, a little bit about this report that was released this spring. What are some of the most interesting findings from this report?
So this is the second time we've done this report, and the key finding, just comparing the first to the second round, is that that unfortunately most of the issues around caregiving have not gotten better; they've gotten worse, in fact. And that in particular, the way people in Canada think about caregiving, and I'll remind you that's 1 in 4 Canadians is a caregiver today. Half of all of us will be a caregiver at some point in our lives. I'm a caregiver myself. I do a bunch of stuff for my grandma, who doesn't live too far from me. Um, the big thing that's changed from the first round to the second round is that caregiving issues have become much more about cost of living and the pocketbook and being able to afford to be a caregiver. So, in addition to caring about things like, of course, the state of the healthcare system, how hard it is to get services, and so on and so forth, the resounding thing that comes through loud and clear in our report is that caregivers need help financially with the day-to-day finances that come along with being a caregiver.
Does that include them having to take time off work too? Is that being added on to it, or
It
is that
does.
outside of that?
It does. And this plays out in a couple of different ways. So there are people who just stop working altogether, and that's really a choiceless choice for most people who stop working. And typically, unfortunately, it's women who take some more significant times out of the labor market in order to provide care. The impact of that, of course, is that less money coming into the household, harder to put food on the table, pay the mortgage and all, pay the rent and all that other stuff. So that's one way this manifests itself. Another way is working less. So moving down to part-time rather than full-time or fewer full-time hours or even fewer part-time hours, stuff like that, which has the same material effect of less money coming into the household to pay for the things that are required for to provide care or to live your life like anybody else. The other way that this presents itself for other people actually is more or less the opposite, where people doing a lot of intense care end up working even more and find a second job or sometimes even a third job in order to bring in more cash into the household so that they're able to pay for all the things they need to pay for that come along with their caregiving responsibilities. So it actually shows up in different ways depending on who you're talking about here. And the current reality is that somewhere around 65% of caregivers are working today. What that doesn't capture is the fact that 1 in 5 caregivers are over 65, which means that they're more likely to be retired as well. So lots of different angles in all of this. But a key point, though, if you'll allow, is that people on average, if you're a caregiver, are working less than they otherwise would because of their care responsibilities. That comes with an immediate macroeconomic impact on all of us in the sense that we are all poorer to the tune of about $1.5 billion because think about this as economic capacity that we're leaving on the table. These are people who would otherwise be working to their full capacity if they had the support to balance care and work at the same time. So it's sort of as though we're fighting this trade war with one arm tied behind our back. We could have 1.5, almost $1.5 billion extra productivity, more output in our economy, higher earnings, higher tax returns, all that sort of good stuff, if we were able to help people balance work and care more.
Well, I suspect with that group that's working, there must be like sick days that are in there
Totally
too. So the
right.
productivity is probably down from a lot of these people.
This is it. So people taking sick days because they're so burnt out, they're so stretched, it takes a toll on their health in a bunch of different ways. But also people, if you think about, a very concrete example of somebody, actually, let me use my own example. So my grandmother, she lives not far from me. She's a bit of a medical marvel, to be honest with you. She's approaching, she's now about 92, if I remember correctly. Health-wise, great. She has issues. She's lonely, big old West Toronto house. It's her and her cat. That's the big issue for her, right? So that she's quite lonely, unfortunately, which we do all do our best to support in my family. But she does occasionally have medical appointments like everybody else. So in many workplaces across the economy, if I need to take an afternoon out of work to take my grandmother to go to see your gerontologist, for example, you're likely taking a vacation day, a half vacation day, in order to do that. Or if you've got more commitments, you're taking longer of your vacation time to do something related to caring for somebody else. That may sound like a convenient, easy solution, but the later on reality of that is that when you need those vacation days, they're gone because you've used those vacation days to provide care for somebody else. So the actual effect of those vacation days that's intended of you getting a break to restore yourself and do what other things you need to do to go on vacation or just take some time for yourself, that doesn't happen. So people are using their vacation days as well as their sick days to provide care for other people. I, I'm very happy to say that in more and more workplaces, it's becoming more and more common to say to your boss, listen, I need to take half a day off to take my grandmother to her gerontologist. And boss says, don't worry about it. Go ahead, do what you got to do, and hope you're doing okay. And let me know when you're back online rather than dipping into sick days, vacation days, and all that other stuff. So there are some shining lights we're starting to see in the employment market around this, but on average, still it's the case that people are taking sick days and vacation days tied to their caregiving responsibilities.
And then you started off by saying the cost. That really surprised me. That can really add up. One from, going back to part-time, that's obviously a huge hit. But I was reading in the report, was it one in five caregivers spending more than up to $12,000 a year?
That's right.
What kind of
That's a lot of
expenses are
money.
going on there? Yeah.
So that's a lot of money. It's hard enough at the best of times to find an extra $1,000 at the end of every month. These are not the best of times. We see it at the gas pump, at the grocery store. We read every day about the cost of living getting high and higher as time goes on, unfortunately. And this is what people are spending that money on varies a lot. For about a quarter of caregivers and about half of caregivers who support people with intellectual disabilities, for example, just to spotlight one population, for those people, they're literally providing financial support to the person they're caring for. So think about helping with rent, helping with groceries, stuff like that, actually giving them some money to cover the cost of living. For others, it's who aren't doing that. Think about buying nutritional supplements like Ensure, for example. That's very common among older Canadians. Incontinence supplies, home maintenance, home modifications, travel to and from medical appointments, that sort of thing. So what caregivers spend varies significantly from one population to the next. But as you say, about one in five are spending $1,000 a month on their caregiving responsibilities, and that leads to some serious financial strain. So half of caregivers in our report told us that they've experienced financial strain as a result of their caregiving responsibilities. I've got here the number for Alberta specifically, where 75% of Albertans tell us in our survey that they experienced financial hardship as a direct result of their care responsibilities. One again, spotlight on what that means day to day, both kind of today, but also into the future, is that about 20% of caregivers tell us that they've stopped saving entirely. So they're no longer putting cash away. Their caregiving expenses are so high that they're no longer able to squirrel some cash away for one reason or another. And if you'll indulge me for just a second, that comes with some serious problems. Immediately, it means that you're not saving for a rainy day. So if your car breaks down, if your roof needs repair, if if there's a sudden medical situation where you need to spend some money out of pocket, say, and then get reimbursed later through workplace insurance, something like that. Literally, like over Canada Day, the Canada Day holiday, my wife stepped on her glasses and her glasses broke. Right? If you were a care, that's relatively easy thing to deal with. But if you're a caregiver living on the edge, $1,000 a month out of pocket, that sort of thing, because you're not saving anymore, you no longer have that flexibility to deal with those sudden shocks that come for all of us in our day-to-day life, right? It's part of living is stuff happens. That's in the short term. In the longer term, it also means you're not saving for retirement. And that is one of the canaries in the coal mine, is our retirement income system, our retirement system, period, full stop, assumes that we will all have some cash in our bank account to fund our retirement, in addition to Canada Pension Plan, any workplace savings. For many caregivers, these 20% who have stopped saving, it also means they're no longer saving for their retirement. So whether that's for the short term or the medium or the long term, there's a real material impact of the fact that caregivers are so financially strained that they're making some really tough choices about how to spend their money.
Are the caregivers able to tap into like the funds that the senior they're caring for is getting? Like how far does that go? Like their CPP
If
and whatnot.
That's fair if those funds exist, right?
Mhm.
So everybody who works in Canada, of course, has access to at least a bare minimum of CPP. Doesn't go very far, but it does exist. But also you need to remember that that's not a ton of money to begin with. So that's number one. Number two, for a lot of people, they don't have a ton of extra money lying around even into retirement, right? So one of the trends we're seeing across the country is that a lot of seniors in particular are asset rich but cash poor. They may own their house. They're sitting on a big piece of property that's accrued value over the years, but they need a place to live at the end of the day. So it's not as though they're able to liquidate the asset and have access to that cash because they need a place to live. Even if they were to move and downsize potentially, the cost of rent or the cost of buying another house ain't cheap in its own right. So yes, you're right. There are often some assets that caregivers can tap into when they're supporting an aging loved one. But unfortunately, those assets aren't always there, or at least not in the long term, especially if you're talking about, say, paying for long-term care for a couple of years or retirement living for a few years. Those costs are high and getting higher. So those asset pools don't go as far as they used to.
Tell me about it. I was shocked at the amount that
Yeah.
these assisted living places cost. I was like, you you can't afford to live longer than 10 years after you sell your house at some of these
Bingo.
places.
Bingo, exactly. And the other thing too is that many, not in every case, but in many of these cases, those prices are not regulated. So they can be at a rate today, and you make your plans, you look at mom's assets, you make a decision that mom has can no longer live on her own. You do some math and you realize, okay, it looks like with mom's assets, we're going to be able to make all of this work for, let's say, 10 years. So you make that decision. But then as time goes on, those costs increase. And suddenly, mom's assets covering 10 years of care maybe only cover 7 years of care, right? So what do you do then? Then you as the caregiver, what most people end up doing is you as the caregiver reach into your pocket to help mom with her care needs as she ages. So this can get really dicey, really, really, really quickly.
Are Canadians becoming caregivers without even realizing just how financially devastating it can be? Like when you go into this off the hop?
Well, often care starts, if you will, starts small and then grows,
Mhm.
right? So you can start off, to borrow again at an aging parent, you can start off with, as I do for my grandmother, home maintenance, dealing with her taxes, dealing with her banking, that sort of thing. And then as needs change, some months or some years down the line, you're up to, wow, maybe my grandma can't live alone. And she now needs to have more care, either in the home or somewhere else. And then if things keep going, then you might be into 24/7 care later on. So many Canadians who step into this, they're doing it out of love. And I want to be clear that over 90% of the caregivers in our survey tell us they want to be a caregiver. They get a lot of joy and a lot of love and connection out of doing this for their loved ones. So caregivers aren't saying we don't want to do this, give this problem to somebody else. Rather, they're saying this is hard and I need help. And there's a role for the state and for society to support me in doing what I'm going to do anyway, which is supporting my loved one with their care needs.
Okay, so what is the role of the state and society in this? What needs to happen?
So the big thing, and again, this comes through loud and clear in our survey, is caregivers need financial help. They desperately need financial help. And unfortunately, over half of caregivers, I'll use Alberta again specifically in your backyard, over half of caregivers in Alberta told us they don't feel supported by their government at all when it comes to their care needs. So starting with financial support, our number one ask that we've been pushing, in particular, the federal government on from the beginning of our organization and reflected again in our report, is the Canada Caregiver Credit. This is currently a non-refundable tax credit. Fewer than 9% of caregivers access it today for a litany of reasons, including the fact that it's somewhat Byzantine trying to get in the door to access this thing in the first place. And even if you do get in the door, it doesn't help you that much if you don't owe money at the end of the fiscal year because it's a non-refundable tax credit rather than refundable tax credit. So our push to the feds, again, for a few years now, has been take that credit and convert it from non-refundable to refundable, which would have the impact of turning it into cash in pocket for caregivers. That is the easy, low-hanging fruit place to start. It's not even a ton of money. The math that we've worked out based on previous government commitments ends up being about 12.50 a year. So it's like 100 extra bucks a month. It's not a ton of money. I want to be very, very clear, but it's a place to start with that and using the efficiency of the tax code to do that quickly. Beyond that, we can have a really good conversation about caregiver benefits, for example, which we see now in three of four Atlantic provinces and shortly in the fourth, the eastern part of our country, and a version of that in Quebec as well, which is the basic idea of you're a caregiver, odds are you're working less. If you're not working less, your expenses are higher. Therefore, we're going to give you some cash every month to help you with those expenses, with the view towards providing enough care that your loved one is able to stay in the community rather than have to be moved to more expensive, and some more institutionalized care models, like a retirement home or long-term care or group homes and things like that.
Can I
So,
stop you there just for a
yes, please,
second, just
please.
to do a cost comparison? Is it more expensive to have a senior in a care facility than someone taking care of them in their
Dramatically,
home?
by significant order, over 100% orders of magnitude.
Mhm.
The because you're if you're living at home and supported by either combination of loved ones and paid care, the price point is dramatically lower in every part of the country than it is to be in a retirement home, long-term care home, and so on. So there's a reason why all over Canada, virtually every provincial government has looked at this idea of diversion away from more institutionalized care into community care. And by the way, it's not just Canada. All across the European Union, they're looking at this, across parts of Asia, certainly in the United States, Australia, New Zealand, pretty much the entire world is grappling with this issue at the moment. And the unanimous consensus is that it is significantly cheaper to have somebody age in the community with the supports they need, but also the care tends to be significantly better when you're being, I mean, think about the care you would give a loved one is will automatically have a certain magic to it compared to the care that is being given by somebody who's doing it for a living. Not to disparage people doing it for a living, because they do miraculous things every day for
Mhm.
very tragically low wages. But that care, that special kind of love and friendship that comes with providing care for somebody you love, that's very hard to replicate outside the community.
So even if someone was looking this at just a purely financial
Yes,
perspective as a taxpayer, we are still as taxpayers better off, say, to kick in a little bit more with the benefits for the caregivers than to have that senior go into a
correct.
full-time residence.
Without a shadow of a doubt. And unfortunately, what happens a lot is, in particular, older Canadians being um, or sort of deemed to no longer be able to live on their own in the community and be forced into retirement home, long-term care home, or some other sort of more congregate setting for lack of care. So not necessarily because they are a danger to themselves 24/7, but maybe they need some help with groceries, some help with clearing the snow, taking out the garbage, home maintenance, that sort of thing. And that's one of the lessons in particular from Denmark, of all places, is they invest heavily in those kinds of day-to-day activities and needs that all of us need. And as we age, it becomes harder for all of us. They invest heavily in that sort of thing because they figured out that if you can make sure that Mrs. Janeiro's snow is cleared all the time, it won't be an issue for her to worry about or for the city to worry about or something. And therefore, it's more likely that she won't have to move out of her home purely because she can't maintain that part of having being a homeowner on her own.
Thanks for clarifying that, James. And before I cut you off there, we were talking about um, things the government can do, and one of them was making adjustments to the refundable credits there, and the other thing was increasing benefits. Is
Yeah.
what are benefits at right now, and sorry, what provinces get benefits, or how does it
So
work?
currently today, it's Newfoundland, Nova Scotia, and PEI have caregiver benefits. It varies a little bit, but it's give or take $400 a month, more or less across the three provinces. New Brunswick is working on theirs. The current government committed to developing this in their election, which happened coming up on 2 years ago, I believe. And they are working on it out there. So before too long, the entire maritime region of our country will be covered by caregiver benefits of the sort that we're discussing. In Quebec, it's a little bit different, where it's more like, if you will, it's more like a service contract, where you would say that I, James, will provide X number of hours of care for my grandmother every week or every month in return for Y amount of cash from the provincial government. So it's more of a sort of a direct relationship in that way rather than a monthly benefit. But that's what's happening there. That does not exist anywhere else in the country. So once you get on to Ontario and further west, you don't see caregiver benefits in the form of cash in pocket the way that we're advocating for. You don't see that anywhere else in the country. You do see it in the UK. You do see it in Australia, New Zealand, Germany, and various other parts of the world. But we're really working hard to try to get this idea to come to Canada in a big way because we see the real benefit of this.
Well, just as you pointed out, just the cost alone, never mind the
Exactly.
human impact of it, just makes sense.
Dollars and cents. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Hmm. And in terms of other expense issues, is it causing people to, in the end, going, I can't do this? Are you hearing that, you know what, I just can't make ends meet. I'm going to have to go back to work, or
Yeah. So the human impact of caregiving is can be really hard on the caregiver. So in Alberta, 70% of caregivers told us that they've experienced some negative emotional impact as a result of their caregiving responsibilities. And that can be everything from anxiety, anxiety, depression, sleeplessness. It can be a lot of different things, but that's a pretty overwhelming number. 70% saying that they've had some negative impact on their emotional and mental health. as a result of their care responsibilities. I'll give you one quite disturbing statistic for Ontario, where I am. The Ontario Caregiver Organization earlier this year, in their report, published that 1 in 5 caregivers in Ontario use the emergency room as a form of respite. So basically, what that looks like is they were out of options. There was nowhere else they could go. They desperately needed a break. And they go to the emergency room because at least in the emergency room, they know that somebody else is there to help them with their care responsibilities when they bring their loved one with them. We've seen more and more cases of abandonment, of people surrendering loved ones to care homes, to group homes, to community living organizations, to even to government offices over the years and stuff like that, tied directly to the fact that people are burnt out and they feel like they can't go on anymore. These are solvable problems, right? So if we can help a caregiver to be feel to get the support they need in order to keep doing what they're going to do anyway, you can stave this off, right? You can get ahead of all of this with investment and careful planning up front to make sure that no caregiver falls into that again choiceless choice of the only place I can go to get a break is the emergency room. So we're going to pack mom up in the car and drive to the hospital to at least get a break.
That never even would have occurred to me. That's
Nor
insane.
nor does it to anything other than desperate people who are at the end of their rope and really need some urgent help that unfortunately they're not getting through our systems today.
Wow. And you said that was 1 in 5?
1 in 5. So 1 in 5 caregivers in Ontario have used the emergency room as respite in the last year.
Wow, that is really at the end of your
Yeah,
rope.
yeah, exactly. I don't have that number for Alberta.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I can see if I can track that down for you, but
That was a
that's
question you asked
no,
specifically,
sorry.
or that just came up?
That particular stat is from a colleague organization who published that in their report. That's from the Ontario Caregiver Organization.
Okay. Wow, that one's
Yeah, it's a
sad.
shocker.
Like really sad.
Yeah.
And when we were talking about different solutions, those two that you mentioned is actually having some benefits for provinces west of Quebec. Anything else that's on your list of things that could make things easier for caregivers?
So the financial part of this, so the reason one of the reasons why we're leading so much in the financial side of this, well, the top reason, as seen in our report, is that caregivers tell us this is their number one priority, that they desperately need some financial help. The other reason is that there's a significant role for the federal government to play on financial supports for caregivers, as well as a role for the provinces to play on the same question. So governments can work cooperatively to solve this shared problem. One other area that's more in the provincial domain of responsibility is this idea of respite. So that number I just gave you about the emergency rooms in Ontario. Caregivers tell us again they need a break. Many are at the end of their rope. That's why many people end up in the emergency room here in Ontario. And the science and the numbers behind this are very, very clear. If you can guarantee to a caregiver that you're going to get a break every once in a while, even if it's a short break, right? So it doesn't have to be 2 weeks in France. It can be a night off. It can be a weekend away. Often it can even be just a date night with your spouse to go to the movies and have somebody else on deck for your care responsibilities. But the key is that it be high quality and that it be guaranteed and predictable. So you know it's coming. And you also know that you will not get a call at 3 o'clock in the morning because your loved one's behavioral issues are activating again.
Mhm.
So it'll be high quality enough that the provider of the respite is able to deal with whatever circumstances come up. That's the key. If you can guarantee a caregiver that kind of even a short break every quarter, every couple of months, something like that, there's a real magic there where caregivers are able to keep doing what they're doing for longer, work more, be better parents, better spouses, better Canadians, and just live their lives better. And as I say, do their caregiving duties for much longer, without burnout becoming an issue. That is more exclusively in the provincial domain because respite services are provincial. But so we're calling on provinces to do something around respite and make sure that it's accessible and affordable and available for caregivers. A concomitant role for the feds in this, though, is making sure that if you are going to avail yourself of respite by saying paying for it out of pocket, like happens in Alberta, for example, where a lot of people use the AISH program funds in order to get a break from their care responsibilities and purchase some respite. The key thing there would be on the federal side to make sure that you get at least some of that back through the medical expenses tax credit when you file your taxes at the end of the year. So, respite is one of the next, if not the next big thing after finances, is making sure that caregivers get a little bit of a break at least on a regular basis.